So just help me, please.
Okay. Jane, do you understand the question?
It's time not only to change the narrative, but start telling the truth. It's time for kids to know, all kids of all kinds, and grown-ups to know, of all kinds, that black history didn't start with slavery. If you haven't introduced your students to Anthony Browder's Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, you haven't done your students a fair job. If you haven't introduced your students to the book Stop Falling for the Okie Doke, you haven't done your students a fair job. It's time for these kids to hear from Robert Wald Sussman's book, which is The Myth of Race, that this whole thing is a myth, and it's time to stop believing the myth, and it's time to stop teaching the myth, and it's time to realize that blacks were doing cataract surgery with metal instruments before there were hospitals in Europe. It's time to realize that blacks were intelligent, creative, adventurous, curious, brilliant people before you white folks evolved. It's time to start teaching the truth. If we don't start teaching the truth pretty soon, people, we're in really big trouble. It's time to start teaching the truth. Now, white people aren't going to be happy with those truths, but eventually they'll be better off. Eventually they will realize that they have been myth-read for the last 400 years. It's time to give up the myth. It's time to tell the truth in history. People, what were the names of Columbus's 3 ships? People, Vine Deloria says he left the old country with 4 ships, but 1 fell off the edge. Now, it makes as much sense to tell that as it does to tell that Columbus discovered America. People, you can't discover a place where people are already living. They discovered it before you got there. It's time to demythologize the schools and history. We are not teaching history, we're teaching hysteria. It's time to start teaching the truth. You could make a huge difference just by doing that for 1 day at a time. Just 1 day at a time. If you tell your kids something they have never heard before, and they go home and tell it to their parents, especially, as mine did, and one of the parents was the head of the school board, it changes the way the system operates. Because that parent has to start thinking in new ways in order to get along with that kid. You want to make home uncomfortable, people, by telling the truth. We need some discomfort.
All right. Well, you